Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara Rosette.
And I'm Jamie Albright. And this week on the show we have
John Gaspard.
Yes, he's a returning guest. Y'all, I love this interview. It was so fun.
It was so interesting. He wrote a book called Held Over, and it's about this small theater in Minneapolis that showed the movie Harold and Maude over and over again for 2 years straight, I think. And it just became a cult classic, partly because of this theater. He did this as a passion project, and it was just really interesting to talk to him about how he interviewed, lots about research and sourcing images. It was not our normal interview, but it was a lot of fun.
It was.
And he talks about organizing too. So even if you're not into this type of book and not writing this type of book, I think it'd still be helpful because he talks about how he kept track of everything. And there was a lot of stuff to keep track of.
Yeah.
It made me feel a little nauseous thinking about it.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, and we did not set this up, but Ingram Spark is our sponsor this month. And John talks about Ingram Spark and how helpful it was. And we didn't even set that up.
We'll talk about Ingram Spark a little bit more, but yeah, it worked out really well.
It did.
What have you had going on this week?
Oh, I've been working, and someday, as we all know, some days are great. Some days chipping words out of concrete.
That's such an accurate description.
And I've had a couple of those days because what I'm trying to do now is take this story that I've written and that's somewhat true and make it fiction and make it a story and
not just a memoir.
Yeah. So it's been tricky, but good. So I've done that, and that's really pretty much it. I haven't done just a whole lot else. Yeah, no, not much.
Okay, that's good. Sometimes the writing is just all that's going on, and it's not super exciting to talk about writing. We try and make it interesting, but there's only so much you can say about it.
Problem. It's not exciting. So
yeah. Let's see. I haven't done much this week either. Monday was a holiday in the U.S., Labor Day, and I didn't do any writing or actual work that day, but I cleaned off my desk and I did some other stuff that needed to be sorted and cleaned out around the house. And I feel so much better. It's amazing, how just for me, just cleaning things off helps me. But that's like a end of book ritual, I think, because things pile up as I'm writing. And now the Cleopatra book is out. I can put things away. I've done a lot of nitnoid things that needed to be done. Still emailing my list and keeping them updated on what's happening. And the books are being printed and going out. So that's all good. The pre-order will be up and it will be out in mid-October.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So that is about all I've had going on work-wise. But I do have a couple of other things to mention. One is I was on the Two Authors podcast, which we've had Nick on. Doug will be on soon. They interviewed me and that podcast came out this week. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And we talked about writing and publishing and direct sales and all kinds of stuff. And then also, if you are interested in changing to a different newsletter provider, Flowdesk is ending their unlimited plan, but you can still get on the unlimited plan if you subscribe by November 28th. This is in 2025. If you're listening to this in the future, you can get unlimited emails and subscribers, which that's a good deal because some platforms charge for each email you send out or by number of subscribers. So that's a good deal. The new pricing model kicks in after November 28th, and it will scale. So the more subscribers you get, the more you'll pay. But we have an affiliate code, and I'll put that link in the show notes, and you can get 50% off Flowdesk. So sign up now, get 50% off, and then you're locked into that plan.
Yeah. I switched to them in July, and I really enjoy the platform. I have one little issue. I'm sure it's a me issue, but I like to put my social media videos in my newsletter. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Links for it, but when I put the link, it doesn't accept the link. Not exactly sure, but I haven't dug around. I need to investigate it. I'm usually flying by the seat of my pants, and so by the time I'm doing the newsletter, I'm ready to
get it done and get it out. Yeah. I've used Flowdesk for a while. I signed up because they had the unlimited plan. I still have ConvertKit, and that's hooked up to my Shopify, and I use that for all my normal stuff, and I've had that the longest, so I don't want to get rid of that. But I use Flowdesk for a new release newsletter that I send out for historical mysteries. So about twice a month, I have a newsletter that goes out and says, hey, these are the new books. You might like these. And it's really easy to set up. If I was a newer author, I might be all on Flowdesk. I do ConvertKit. So those are two good options.
And I wanted to bring up I think it was last week, Elena Johnson mentioned in her group that if you were in KU, you could now be in libraries. And along with several other authors, were saying until Amazon changes their terms of service, not doing that. Yesterday in the 20 books to 50K group, there was a post that said that the terms of service have been updated. But if you dig down in the comments, it actually says the help page has been updated. The actual terms of service have not been updated as of today. What is today? The 4th?
The 4th, September 4th,
2025. You might want to hang on until they get the terms of service. It depends. If you're cautious, you might want to wait.
It depends on how comfortable you are with risk.
Yeah, and I'm pretty comfortable with risk, and I'm not willing to do it until the terms of services. And
a big chicken, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's probably one of those things that it's probably not going to matter in the long run. But if it's going to make you worry, then I would say just wait, because it sounds like they will update it.
So that's all I have.
Okay. We should hear about Ingram Spark because they're fantastic.
All right.
Our sponsor this week is Ingram Spark. You have a story, share it with the world. Ingram Spark offers everything you need to publish, promote, sell, and print your book. Reach millions of readers worldwide with powerful tools created for independent authors. Get started for free at ingramspark.com/learn more. Today, we are really excited to have John Gaspard with us. Hi, John. How are you?
Hello. It's great to see you both again.
Hey, it's good to have you back.
John is an award-winning author of the Eli Marks and Como Lake Players mystery series. He's a screenwriter, filmmaker, and director of 6 low-budget features. His recent books include the 10th installment of the Eli Marks series, Held Over, a retrospective of the movie Harold and Maude in its 2-year run at the Westgate Theater. He lives in Minneapolis with his wife, 2 greyhounds, cats, and various pet allergies.
That's us.
I get it.
I'm delighted to be back, and I'm going to just preface everything by saying one of the things I love about your podcast is the reality you bring every time you come on the air. There are other podcasts in this universe and also not in the book universe that only present positive, everything's great stories. And back when I was
bring you down.
No, you're here to bring the reality. Back when I was doing a lot more filmmaking than I am now, and I was writing filmmaking books, at the time there were all these articles about hey, this person put $60,000 on their credit card and made a movie and it went to Sundance, and now they're making a new movie and they're in the business. And they never talked about the 900 other movies that did the exact same thing and didn't go anywhere. And those are the people that I interviewed when I was doing those interviews back in the day, people who had maxed out the credit cards, lost their house, got divorced. And the analogy I use, which maybe isn't a great one, is it's like saying, hey, I cured cancer. I'm just not going to tell you about the people who died. I'm only going to tell you about the ones who lived. And that comes up a lot in our book industry, where you're only hearing super success and you can't help but think, oh dear, I must be a failure. When in fact, you're not. You did a book, you got it out. Someone bought a copy today. That is a victory. And that's something we need to keep remembering, particularly now. I'm sure you two are getting these AI generated marketing emails that just go right to the heart of our personal hubris. Hey, John, I read your book and you are so good at this. And this is such a great story. And they just go right to they cut you to the quick. Anyway, having a podcast like yours, where you talk about the reality of it, the successes and the, hey, not so much successes, and the, I haven't written for a while things. Those are the things people need to hear, because that's the reality of what we do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
We
Keep
appreciate
it up.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
During the time when it was after my sister had passed away, we got a review that basically said, enough already, with the grief and everything. I'm sorry about her sister, but enough already. And Sarah and I both were like, you know what? From the beginning, we have been telling you exactly what's going on, and the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah. Trying to be real transparent and just let people know that
it's very
that's
helpful.
life.
Anyway, That's not what we came here to talk about, but I wanted
No,
to
but
thank you
thank
for
you so
doing
much
that.
for saying so. That was really nice. Give us an update on what's happened since you were last on the podcast in April of 2023. Gosh,
It's
that's
been a while.
episode 164 about writing craft.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been an interesting couple of years. There are three things I'll mention, one being the big one that I reached out to you about. The other two things are, I think, important for people to listen to. One is I was at a book fair with my wife just a little over a year ago, and there were maybe 60 authors there. It was a community center, which was in a church. And I had her books up and my books up on her displays and all that. And a woman walked by and she pointed at one of the displays. I have these 11 by 17 little mini posters of the books, and it's of my young adult Eli Mark's book. And she said, "Is that book on Ingram?" And I said, "Yeah, it is. All my books are on Ingram." And she said, "Great. I'm doing a big event out at the airport. And we're having a handful of writers come out, and we're going to set up tables for you for MEA weekend when all the parents and kids are going on vacation. We're going to have tons of kids there, and I want kids' books. And I like books of that. And you're on Ingram, so I'm going to ask you to come do that." And I got to tell you, it's an airport, so there's a constant flow of people. And it wasn't, "Hey, John, bring your books." It was, "Hey, John, I'm going to buy a bunch of your books and sell them for you at this table." So whether someone bought it or not, as they walked by, I had already sold the books to the bookstore that were running this. Point number one is make sure you're on Ingram, because you never know who is going to realize that you're legit when you do that. So there's that. The other thing was I have this Eli Mark series of 9 mystery books, and someone reached out of the blue and said, "I have an idea for the 10th book, and I've already written it, but it's not Eli Mark's book, but it takes place at the Magic Castle, because I go to the Magic Castle all the time." He said, "I've never been. I have a book about a magician. The thing people say the most often is, you've got to do a book where he goes to the Magic Castle, but I've never been." And because I was open and willing to explore this idea, I now all of a sudden have a 10th book with a good co-writer who I've never met. We've met on Zoom. But that was an interesting process to just be open to that while still double checking, making sure it's not some sort of flake or anything. But the real reason I wanted to chat with you was because there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years, and a little bit led by Joanna Penn, about being authentic and about writing a book from your heart. And I'm getting up there. I'm in, I would say, the back 9 of a golf game of life. And I wanted to do something special, a really cool book that didn't necessarily sell a ton. And I don't know, it's just coming out now. I don't know if it's going to sell a ton or not, but which I would go, yeah, this is the ultimate book from my heart. And that came from an interview I did with a guy who wrote a book about the making of the movie Harold and Maude. Now, Harold and Maude came out 50 years ago. I don't know if either of you have ever even seen Harold and Maude. It is considered a cult film. When it came out, it didn't do particularly well. And then it sat at a movie theater for 2 years here in Minneapolis. And from that became a cult film and played for months and years in other cities like Detroit and Toronto and Boston and Paris. Anyway, I had interviewed this guy. He'd written a book about the making of the movie. And I got a text from my brother after the interview came out. And my brother, who's a couple years older, said, "You should have written that book, because I really do know as much or more about the movie than that guy did." But I thought, that's not the book I want to write. What I would like to do is, because the movie played here in Minneapolis for 2 years at a theater a couple miles from my house. That's where I saw it when I was in junior high. And I followed that adventure of it being here for 2 years and the stars coming a couple times for anniversaries. And I shot super great footage of them being here. And I had dinner with Bud Cort, who was one of the stars. And I was really immersed in it. And I thought, nobody else can tell that story. That would be an interesting story to tell, is what happened when this movie came to this theater and sat here for 2 years. And that became the book held over Harold and Maude at the Westgate Theater, which is a book only I can write. And that's what I want to express, is find the book that only you can write. And it's a really interesting process.
Love that.
Yeah. And I think that's true, that sometimes there are passion projects that we do and we know that they're not maybe going to be a huge financial payoff, but has it been worth it for you, for the satisfaction in this project?
It has. And my point of view on writing books, and I've written, there's 10 Eli Marks books, there's 3 Como Lake Players books, there's my Greyhound books, which are pastiches, a couple filmmaking books. The goal has never been to make a living at it, because when I started, I already had a job and I was doing just fine. I didn't need another job, but I wanted to do these things. And it's still that way. They don't have to make money. It helps if they don't lose money, which is a different point of view than they have to make money. And I like when people like them. But I know that deep down you're supposed to write to market. Well, I'm the market. These are written for me. And if enough people also seem to like them, then they're good for them as well. But I'm not trying to hit a particular market. And in this case, like I said, nobody else probably could have written this book. And I didn't realize how much fun it would be to dive in and explore something that happened 50 years ago using the tools that we have today to do that kind of research.
You researched quite a bit for this, right? So how did you approach your research, and any tips that would be helpful to people who are doing research heavy topics?
Like I say, it was 50 years ago that it happened. As that turned out, doing just basic internet research, I found that there were a few key people who were still alive. One of them being the assistant manager of the theater at the time, was not only alive, but very interested in talking about it. Again, doing a little bit of internet research, there was a guy named Doug Strand, and Doug Strand was a court clerk who saw the movie 160 times. He lived near the theater. He would go several times a week. And at the 1-year anniversary of the movie playing at the Westgate, the people who ran the Westgate knew about Doug, obviously, because he'd seen the movies often, and said, Ruth Gordon is coming. She's going to be our special guest for the 1-year anniversary. Would you like to be her escort? And so Doug was paired up with Ruth, and he already knew all about her anyway, and they became fast friends, and he was friends with her until she died. However, the name Douglas Strand is not a particularly unique name. There's a lot of people with that name. But the quirk that I found was back in the 70s when they would write about people, at least in the newspapers here in Minnesota, they would say, here's their name, and then in parentheses, and here's their address. They would always put in their address. Not happening today, I'm sure. And so doing some reverse searching, I was able to track down, it said there are 9 phone numbers associated with this. So I called the first one and got an automated answering thing, and I explained who I was and what I wanted to do. And if this is that Doug Strand, I'd love to talk to you. A couple days went by. 9 o'clock at night, my wife and I watched TV. My phone rings, and it's a Minnesota number, so I answered, and it was Doug Strand. He had gotten my message. I'd lucked out into finding him. And that's just one of the many where if you just dug into the newspapers a little bit, and newspapers.com is great for this, you find all these links and you could track people down. I wasn't able to track down the theater manager at the time, but he was quoted so often 50 years ago in the various newspaper articles, even in Boston, they quoted him when the movie went out there, that I was able to find enough from him that I could assemble his thoughts on the movie. So it became a mix of finding the actual people and talking to them, and then finding interviews with them that I could reference in the book to tell that whole story of what happened over those 2 years.
That's great. That's amazing. I thought going to see Footloose 5 nights in a row when it was here in my little small town, and you could get in for $5 a night. I thought that was excessive.
Not with that movie. Are you kidding? Now, here's a little fun fact for you about that movie that you might not have known, Jamie, that when they first finished that movie and tested it, audiences said, yeah, but they never dance. And the whole dance number at the end was shot separately. They shot it way after the fact because they went, oh, yeah, they never actually danced.
That is so funny. I love that movie.
Yeah.
I might have to watch it again now that we're talking about it. So besides the newspaper.com and everything, like how did you, other ways you went about tracking down people from the story or family members or grandchildren? Were they open to talking about it? Was it weird?
I only ran into one person who thought it was weird. There was a Harold and Maude fan page on Facebook, and I posted what I was doing, and this woman responded and told a great story about what had happened during one of the busy nights there because she had worked there. And I responded and said, oh, that's terrific. Do you mind if I quote you in the book? And she got very upset in message form saying, I never said you could use this in a book. How dare you? She went over the top on it, even though I said I'm writing a book. Yeah. So that was an aberration. I didn't run into that a lot. I ran into people like at the 2-year anniversary of the movie at the theater, when both stars showed up and it was a big deal and their lines are on the block, some neighbors, about 30 of them, gathered together and got protest signs and marched in front of the theater that says, we want a new movie, we want a new movie. Because it was their neighborhood theater and they'd not had another movie there for over 2 years. Now, keep in mind, this is just before the rise of the multiplex.
Yeah.
So people had neighborhood theaters, and there were a lot in Minneapolis that don't exist anymore, and they were all designed to be walking distance from your house, and every week they'd have a different movie, and every Saturday they'd have matinees, and you could send the kids. The neighbors were not happy that they've had the same movie there for 2 years. And again, looking at the newspapers of the time, they had a quote from Betty Owen, who was the organizer of it, and it said, Betty Owen, parentheses, address. So I tracked that down and I found a phone number for that address, and I called and I said, I'd like to speak to Betty. They said, oh, Henry and Betty don't live here any longer, but here's where he is. And I got his number and I called him, and his wife had died a couple of years before, but he absolutely remembered what happened and was very interested in talking about it. But he did, one of the first things he said was, I know the protest is of interest to you, but how are you going to do a whole book about the protest? And I had to explain it wasn't just about the protest. It was about where did the theater come from? Where did this movie come from? What happened when they came together and what happened when they went apart?
Yeah, sure.
So he was delighted to do that. Another one that I was surprised was so willing to chat with me was there's an actor named John Rubinstein, who is a character actor. If you saw his picture, you go, oh, I've seen him on tons of TV shows. And he's also a composer and a director. He's the son of Arthur Rubinstein, the conductor. And the part of Harold was written for him. He was friends with the screenwriter in college, and the screenwriter wanted John Rubinstein to play the part. And John Rubinstein did a screen test with Bud Cort and I think 3 other actors who tested for it. And it was decided by the director that Bud Cort was the best choice. And John didn't get the part. But he was more than willing to exchange a number of emails with me about that experience, about what he knew about the screenwriter, what their relationship was, what the screen test was like, what he thinks about the finished product, which is a movie he loves, and he thinks that Bud Cort did a great job. It was really interesting to be able to reach that far into production and find out, oh, that's cool. That's what actually was intended.
Yeah. Why did it stay there for 2 years?
This economics, it kept selling tickets. Every
Really?
night. Yeah, it would sell out on weekends. It had
Crazy.
people there every night. The demographics changed. For a while. It was a lot of college students. For a while, it was a lot of older people. And after 2 years, so the 2-year mark was around end of March, 1974. A couple months later, things had dropped off. And so they said, we're going to change movies in a while. And then the numbers picked up again and people kept coming and kept coming. And then in June, they finally said, yeah, we're going to have to just change movies. And they did. But it's a movie that hit people in their hearts and was a unique combination of the right cast with the right Cat Stevens score and the right director who took a kind of little overly long script and edited it down to a really tight 90-minute movie that hit people right where they live. There's a theater a small theater, like a 40-seat theater in Germany that runs it every Sunday night for 50 years. They've never stopped running Harold in Maude.
It's such an interesting marketing tactic because you would think after a couple of weeks, they wouldn't have any more people buying tickets. But obviously, some people had to be going back and seeing it again and again.
There's huge repeat business.
Yeah.
And I found a quote from the director of marketing at Paramount Pictures, who it said it drove them crazy because they couldn't figure out not only why was it happening, but how could you recreate it?
Yeah.
And the situation at the theater it was a neighborhood theater that had been in decline for years because it just was. And a couple years before, they ran a Mel Brooks movie called The 12 Chairs. And most movies ran there for a week, maybe 2 weeks, nothing longer than that for many years. And that one ran for 12 weeks. And they went, oh, that's interesting. And then they put Where's Papa in there. And Where's Papa, another quirky comedy, ran for 36 weeks. And so the booker went, okay, this Harold and Maude movie opened and closed at Christmas 1971. And the reason it opened and closed was it was a Paramount movie. And it went into all the big movie theaters around the country. And it only went into those theaters because a little movie called The Godfather was supposed to go into those theaters and it wasn't done. And so they gave the theater owners, you can't have that, but you can have this. And it had no promotion, terrible marketing, no name value. Right before Christmas, nobody went and it died in 2 weeks. But this booker that got great reviews when it came to town. It really did. It got excellent reviews from all the papers in town. Let's try it again. And in March of 72, dropped it into the theater. A local columnist wrote an article about it 2 days before, and they virtually sold out on its first night. People just were ready for it somehow. And they trusted the theater when it came to, if it says it's quirky and fun, it is quirky and fun. That was the problem the theater had after Harold and Maude left was, okay, how do we do it again? And they were never quite able to do it again.
There's some marketing things that you just can't recreate. Yeah. But it's so interesting to look at them and try and figure out why they worked. But I have a question about all these interviews that you've done. Did you take notes? Did you record people? How did you compile it all? How did you winnow out the best parts? Because it sounds like you had tons of material.
I did. I'd done a couple filmmaking books 10 years ago or so. And one of them was called Fast, Cheap, and Under Control, Lessons Learned from the Greatest Low-Budget Movies of All Time. And it looks at about 25 great low-budget movies and the lessons you can learn from them. And the interviews for it were a mix of interviews I did myself, like we're doing right now, and past interviews that I could just reference in the back of the book. This quote came from here, that quote came from there. And you put them all together and you get an interview that makes sense. So I was used to mixing and matching existing interviews with new interviews. And on a technical level, let's hear it for Scrivener and their ability to just put everything in there. You can just put everything in. And I literally would go through for example, the interview with John Rubinstein about the casting of Harold and Maude. That little section is made up of my emails with him and then another interview he did and then something I think he was on a DVD interview somewhere. So it was 3 different sources. As I'm going through and assembling that, I'm assigning a number to each source. John Rubinstein might have sentence 1, it says 30 after that. Sentence 2, 45. Sentence 3, 5. Sentence 4, 30. So that when the book is done, I have all these quotes that when you read them, it sounds like a perfectly fine interview. And in the back of the book, in the notes, it says, this sentence came from here, this sentence came from here, this sentence came from here. A little bit futzy. It allowed me great breadth because I could quote people who were dead, who had great things to say that were in relation to something someone else had just said.
And let me just say, we do not use futzy on this podcast enough. So thank you for using that word.
There's nothing wrong with being futzy.
Did you have another question a minute ago?
I just had some observations that one, you were talking about how the reviewer of the movie, that they were saying how good this book was and the people believed them and they went and they saw. I think that's really important when we are just to bring it back to what we do is finding reputable reviewers. A lot of times especially with TikTok and social media influencers, they're raising a book and talking about the book, but they haven't read the book.
Yeah.
They're being paid to do that. And so because of that, we can't always trust their reviews. So when you're searching out those people to review your book or talk about your book, checking their reputation is really important because you want people who are going to listen to them and believe them and not just go, they said this book was good, but it was terrible. And then the second thing is that when we are looking at other projects or, for instance, this movie or other movies that have been really successful, or why? What are the feels? The only reason people are coming back to that theater to see this movie over and over again is because of the feelings that they're getting from this movie.
Yep.
And what are those feels? Like, what is that? And how can we incorporate those things into our story? Those are my observations.
This is probably a cliche, but I think the more personal you make it, the more universal you make it.
Yeah.
And the screenwriter of Harold and Maude wrote a very personal story it was based on an experience, not explicitly based, but he had in his early 20s had met a woman who meant a lot to him who had died. And I'm surprised nowadays when some of the negative reviews of the movie say, this is so weird, this is so horrible, this 19-year-old boy has a relationship with an 80-year-old woman. But that wasn't what the audience was feeling. The audience was feeling, here's somebody who's lost, who's found someone who understands that he's lost and has given him some tools that he can use to not be lost after she's gone. And that's what was universal, and that's what hit everybody. Plus, it's a great Cat Stevens score that, I know this from my movie making, when you add a piece of music, particularly a piece of music the audience already knows, you're riding on the coattails of that emotion. And it's something, unfortunately, we can't do in our books, which is pain. I've taken some of my short stories and turned them into audiobooks with music. And the difference is night and day between and I have a wonderful narrator who does a fantastic job. But when my composer, Chip Barber, adds music to it, it just takes it to a whole new level. And that's one of the reasons that Harold and Maude is so successful, was the director had a really keen sense of what was needed emotionally by the music.
Yeah, maybe someday we will have that option of adding in a score or emotional beats that you can feel through music. That'd be very interesting. Let's talk about the photos, because it's a photo book, basically. You have photos throughout. So how did you get those, and how was the process for getting the rights and things?
It was easier and more expensive than I thought. I'd looked at other books that looked at movies and saw particularly the one about the making of Harold and Maude, and there were very few pictures in it. And again, thanks to Joanna Penn, she's, I think, the first person thanked in the acknowledgments in the back of the book. I thought, this is going to be a beautiful book. This is going to be a coffee table book that is as much about the visuals as it is about the text. And so I started searching online, and started learning about what can you use and what can't you use. And I spoke to, via Allied, I spoke to Catherine Goldman, who's an attorney. I kind of got a free 15-minute consultation, but that was really all I needed. Explained what I wanted to do. And I said, I see these photos all over the internet. What can I use and what can't I use? And what's fair use and what isn't fair use? And this, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but this is the premise I used. If the photo is licensed by someone, some organization, pay for the license and you're fine. If it isn't licensed by someone, then fair use might come into play if you can't find anybody who's claiming it. But as long as you transform it, you're going to be on safer ground. And transformation can be one, if it applies directly to what you're talking about in the paragraph that it's sitting next to. If it's bringing that idea to life, and if there's a caption, then you've met the minimum requirement for fair use. So with that in mind, I started searching for Harold and Maude pictures. And I'm going to give you some numbers here that I might illustrate how this would go. I thought, just out of the blue, I said, all right, this book's going to cost me $5,000. I can afford to lose $5,000, and I'll have a nice book when I'm done.
Yeah.
About 3,000 of it is going to be spent on, I'm going to license photos, which meant going to all the licensing sites and finding photos that I liked. And then in some cases, a photo be licensed by 3 different companies. So who has the cheapest version of that? We'll go with that. So making that list as you go. And then also going to the local historical society here, and they have all the files from all the newspapers. And you can go through, it is not a fast process, go through all of their photo files. And these are not particularly well-organized photo files. Here's the photos from December 17th, 1971. And here's a big manila envelope, and here's a bunch of little manila envelopes, and here's all the photographers who were shooting for the Star and Tribune that day. And you got to go through their negative strips to find stuff. But I know that something happened on that day or on the day before, so I'm going through all of them. And I was disappointed in some cases because there were a couple photos that turn up all the time online about Harold and Maude at the Westgate, and they were missing from the files. They were by that photographer, and someone had taken those negatives out and not put them back in. But there were also a bunch that they had taken and never printed. So from their first year anniversary, I have a bunch of behind the scenes shots of Ruth Gordon at the theater, never printed, beautiful shots, $25 a piece if you want a book. But more if you want to put them on the cover. That's $25 is pretty cheap. There were some photos that were $100 to get, but those are pretty cheap. And then I got super, super lucky because the theater itself is called the Westgate Theater. It opened in 1935. And there wasn't a lot about the guy who founded it, Carl Fust. I found that there was a couple articles. He had been a violinist for the Minneapolis Orchestra. He'd gone into the insurance business. He wanted to open theater, had no background in that. Opened the theater in 1935 and died in 1937. And he had grand visions for the theater. Again, going through the old newspapers and names and blah, 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 I found the name of what appeared to be his grand. So I reached out to her, and again, you get the skeptical response. Who are you? What are you asking? I explained what I'm doing. And she said, oh, yeah, I have stuff on that. Come on over and I'll show you. And now keep in mind, there's 4 photos of the Westgate Theater that exist at this point. Then they show up everywhere when you do research on that. So I go to her house with my wife because I didn't want to be creepy. I thought I'll bring my wife. Then it's not creepy. And she said, I don't know if it'll be interesting to you. And she started opening these photo albums. Here's a picture of the lobby when it opened in 1935. Here's a picture of what had a special celebration room. Here's a picture of the inside of the theater. Just gorgeous stuff that had never, ever been released. That she said, no, go ahead, put them in the book. That'd be just great. Go ahead and put them in the book.
Oh, wow.
So finding someone who not only had this stuff, but was willing to let me look at it, I was able to build with her photos and the stuff she had. And her mother had scribbled some notes in a memoir about it. I was able to build a history of the theater starting in 35 and find out why he died in 37 and why what was going to be this glorious showplace theater kind of declined almost immediately because there was no one with a vision behind it anymore. And it just became a little neighborhood theater and struggled for 40 years. So there was that balance of finding personal photos where the people said, sure, go ahead, finding people online who had the rights to them. And then the pot of gold was a licensing house that had 200 photos that were taken behind the scenes on the shooting of Harold and Maude that no one had ever done anything with them. And all of a sudden they go, you got to pay $100 for the contact sheet. And then it's $100 for each photo after that. So I'm going, all right, I'll spend a third of my photo budget.
Yeah.
This, and because they're the Harold and Maude fans will go crazy. These photos have never been seen before. Then the other 2,000 was spent on the design, and I got very lucky on that because the folks who designed all my book covers also do interior design. Approach them with the project, and they said, "This is fantastic. We would love to do this book." And boom, for $2,000, which was my budget, they created a book that is every page is. There's no template for the book. There was a look thing that we created, but every page was different. It all's designed tied together, but every page was designed. And it's just a beautiful book.
Can you tell us more about that, collaborating with your designer? What was that process like? Did you have a vision and conveyed it to them, or did you just say?
A little of both. It's a husband and wife team. Their company's called Design for Writers, and they're out of the UK. I've never met them or spoken to them. It's all been done via email, and they've done 20 covers for me.
Oh, wow.
But they're just great. The first step was what was the front cover going to look like and what was the overall design look of it. And I had, luckily, in 1975, when I was, whatever I was then, freshman in high school or something, I was in a film class, and I had a pretty decent still camera, and I'd gone around and taken pictures of my local neighborhood theaters, the exteriors of them, because there were 3 theaters within walking distance of my house back in the day. And I had 4 or 5 exterior photos of the Westgate Theater from 1975 that looked pretty good, pretty good. And I touched them up because I have Photoshop and know how to do that, and got one of them looking really good, and changed the posters in front of the building. So they were Harold and Maude posters, changed the stills so they were stills in the movie, and then gave it to my designer, Andrew, and said, I wanted to say on the marquee, held over Harold and Maude, and that I want to be the cover in some way, shape, or form. And so he fixed it so it looks like it's actually like you were there, and you were there because it is a photo from that era. It's just the marquee's been changed. And then he looked at the marketing that they'd done for the movie. The poster for Harold and Maude, when it first came out, was horrible. The marketing department had no idea what to do with this movie. And it's an all white poster, and it says Harold and Maude. One word is in purple, one is in pink, with black type at the bottom saying it was in. It's a terrible poster. But they had established a color scheme and a font for Harold and Maude. And so he put that on the cover. So he's reproducing kind of the look of that first poster with most of the cover is this photo. And then his wife, Rebecca, who did the interior, then took that look of using those 2 colors. And we went back and forth with, here's what each chapter heading will look like. Here's what a page will look like. Here's what a boxed story would look like. And there were maybe a couple iterations back and forth. And then I picked one, and I said, I like the way the captions look. This is great for here. I think you need to screen something back there, but this is great. Do you want to do a chapter? And she said, no, I'll just do the whole book. I'll be back in a week. And then I got a PDF a week later where she laid out the whole book, which kind of made sense. So we weren't piecemealing it. And then I just went through and in the text and said, photo number, whatever goes here, photo number, whatever goes around here. So she knew where things went, and there's 160 some photos in there. Plus, on top of that, newspaper ads for the movie. So there's probably over 200 images that she's dealing with, but they were all numbered and cross-referenced because I'm futzy that way. So she was able to lay it out beautifully. And then I would just go through and say, okay, on page 48, you have 2 pictures. One of them is a production still from Harold and Maude that everyone has seen a million times. The other one is a behind the scenes still that no one's seen for a while. Reverse the size on them. The popular one can be much smaller. The one no one's seen has got to be bigger. And I said, one of the overall directions was, I want to turn pages and see full page photos. I want to see a full page photo. And she did a lot of that. So there's a lot of oohing and eyeing as I'm going through the PDF going, oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. And it was just a fairly quick iteration back and forth of tweak this, tweak that, tweak this. I found her a couple other photos when there were pages that seemed a little dry without images. And before we knew it, we'd turned it around. And then I said, I want to do, because everybody's doing it now, I want to do a bespoke version of the hardcover with end papers. And I bought, I think, a dozen they're not rare Harold and Maude photos, but they're not the photos you see all over the place, but they're also not the $100 photos. They were $39 photos. And they did end papers. So then there's a hardcover version, there's a hardcover bespoke version, and then there's a paperback version. And the fun thing I learned, for those of you who are chomping at the bit to do your own bespoke books via Book Vault, and I didn't know this until quite recently, they're happy to make a bespoke book for you. They're not going to distribute it for you. You're going to have to do that yourself, which is fine because I have avenues for doing that. But that's why there's a normal hardcover and a bespoke hardcover, because they won't distribute the bespoke ones.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking somebody needs to be meticulous and detailed to do this sort of thing, because there's so much cross-referencing, and I think that would help a lot if you were able to keep track of the small details and enjoyed that, it sounds like.
Yes and no. I'm not a huge detail person. I'm okay. It helped that the book itself was divided into 5 very separate sections from the beginning. It was the West Gate before Harold and Maude before the West Gate, Harold and Maude at the West Gate, Harold and Maude after the West Gate, and the West Gate after Harold and Maude. So I knew I had 5 sections. And then again, let's hear it for Scrivener. Because when I'd done this same sort of thing without all the images for the earlier filmmaking books, it was done in Word. And it was with PDFs. So where was that quote from? Where was that quote from? So much easier, Scrivener. Hey, this quote number 30, where do I find that? Bing, it's right there. That really helped me be organized. And it also helped that it was simply, I was just filling 5 different silos.
And so you obviously self-published this, right? You did it all yourself?
Yes. Yes. I forget that other people don't work that way.
Just the default.
I did work that way. I did have a publisher, and then I got rid of them years ago. And when I go to a Sisters in Crime meeting, I have to forget, oh, yeah, you do. Yeah, you have an agent.
There is another way of living, right?
Another way of living. I don't want to do it, but it seems to make you happy. So go right ahead. Yeah.
It's a beautiful book. It's beautiful. I love the cover. It's awesome.
I couldn't be happier, and I would love for someone to want to buy a few copies. But on the other hand, people spend that much money on a bass boat, and they sit in it once a year. I'm going to get a lot more enjoyment out of this book. And the thing I'm just now learning or starting to experience is, although there are Harold and Maude fans all over the world, this is a very local story. The local newspapers are interested in, the local bookstores are interested in, the local book fairs are interested. There's a kind of a built-in audience for this right here, which, although my novels take place here, there isn't that same sort of local hook the book has.
It doesn't have the nostalgia that this has. Did y'all hear how I said nostalgia?
Fancy.
Like I'm real fancy.
It's funny, I just had to write that word this morning, and I thought, spell check, help me out as I'd get toward the end of this word. And it did. It said, do you mean nostalgia? I said, yes, that's the word I'm trying to write.
Oh, I think this is a good example of one of the things that came up at the conference that I went to recently was the local podcasting that I think is going to be a deal. And this is an example of a book that's very local. Yeah. It has a strong local appeal, but also a wider appeal as well. But if you have a book like that you can lean into the local angle, that could give you some connections and some sales that you might not normally have.
Yeah, here's hoping. If not, I have a beautiful book that I'm very happy with.
If you had to do something different, what do you wish you'd known about creating a book like this?
On a purely practical level, and it's probably been said, and I just missed it, the idea that Book Vault doesn't distribute bespoke books was a surprise to me. And I'm sure it's written somewhere, and I'm sure I've listened. I'm sure Joanna Penn's mentioned it. I just went over my head. So that was a little tiny bump in the road. I went, oh, I've got to do a hardcover that doesn't have end paper. Not a big deal. The designer put it up. It's not a big deal, but I didn't know that. On the one hand, I wished I had done more 50 years ago when the movie was here. I did shoot a bunch of Super 8 footage of the 2 stars when they were here, and a couple pages in the book I've up-resed frames so you can see stuff that no one's ever seen before of the 2 stars here, which is interesting. But I wished I'd taken more pictures of the theater. I wished I would have started the project 25 years ago. There were more people alive that I could have talked to at that point. But creating this kind of book at that point wasn't a possibility. This is a time when we can do that. If I'd done it back then, I would have had to go through a publisher.
It would have been a wholly different process.
It would have been a nightmare. They never would have permitted this many photos because they would have had to pay for them. It would have just not been. It's one of those things where nobody else could write it, and there's no other time I could have done it.
Right.
But now. So I'm really glad I did it now.
That is great. Tell everybody where they can find the book, find out more about your other books.
Sure. Just go to albertsbridgebooks.com. That's albertsbridgebooks.com. All the books are there. And I imagine that the Harold and Maude book could be the first one that pops up on the screen.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. We will have that link in the show notes. Thanks for being here today. It's great to talk to you.
I feel like I know you far better than I should. Just because I am
warts and all.
I'm a constant listener. Other podcasts come and go, but this one sticks around because there's always something going on.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for that. We will have those links in the show notes. And if you want to support the podcast, you can go to wishidknownforwriters.com/support, and you can find the show notes at that same link without the /support. Thanks for listening today. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Ingram Spark. Go to ingramspark.com/learn more. And we will see everybody next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.